super excited for this one. This is the Starboard Generation Deluxe. So the Generation, we've got an inflatable version. It's not something we expected or anticipated Starboard to give us the opportunity to order in 2023. We saw it, we love the Generation, hugely successful board since its introduction a few years ago, but to have this in an inflatable, it just makes perfect sense. Slightly apprehensive before the board arrived, purely simply because the Generation fills a gap in the Starboard lineup that's kind of been left wanting for a few years since they stopped producing a board called the Freeride. Since the Generation's introduction though, it was gone on to be an absolutely runaway success. That, in no small part, is down purely and simply to its versatility. It's a veritable Swiss Army knife of a board in that it does just everything, but everything really, really well. It's almost an all-rounder, but a 12'6" all-rounder. So often you see boards grouped together in an all-rounder category, say of 10'6", but really, in my view, they kind of are left wanting. And the biggest thing that leaves them wanting as a class of board is overall waterline length. Yes, having a board of 10'6" or slightly shorter does make it easier to kind of maneuver and so on, but ultimately the vast majority of paddling tends to be done in slightly flatter conditions, and that's where you find a 10'6" board kind of left begging a little bit quite quickly into ownership of it. That's why a board at say 11'6" or in this case 12'6" really is on the money. The downside of boards as they get longer though is they become slightly less responsive and harder to turn and so on. And that versatility, say playing in small waves, really starts to ebb away. Not so in the case of the Generation. And there's a number of facets in the composite version of the Generation that really are key to that success. What's fantastic though is that Starboard, in their sheer wisdom and design, have recognised that and they've carried over all of those facets into the inflatable version that we have here in front of us today. The Generation then, as an inflatable, really, what are those bits that make it stand out? Well, it's the rocker line firstly, very, very key in kind of making the board work in small waves, but not at the huge detriment to overall flat water performance. The overall outline shape of the board, well, as it starts to flow back down towards the tail, then it really starts to tighten up. And that makes this board incredibly responsive. But that is also something that we see in the composite version of the Generation. Just quickly before we run through the board in a bit more detail, it's also then the fin setup as well. So you see it then in this thruster fin setup that they've also included on this, the inflatable Generation. So look, let's do as we do in all of our videos. We run down from the nose down to the tail as we do. And it is the nose. Basically, the overall outline shape of the board is pretty much a mirror copy that we have of the composite Starboard Generation at 12'6" by 30. The deck then flows back very quickly and simply. We end up with pretty much your standard fare as far as bungee net goes on the front here, so you can carry some small amount of kit around with you on flat water. Also, if you are playing in surf, well, you can probably want to remove that as well, just so it cleans up the deck space on the board. And then we've got the graphics. So the graphics really clean, and they are graphics though. This isn't a weave within the drop stitch fabric and the top layer on this board. It is just a printed graphic, but I really like it. It makes it stand out, something different, and we see that across all of the Deluxe construction boards in 2023. Crossing back down though to the board, a bit further down to the deck pad, this overall crocodile skin finish on this diamond cut deck pad. Yeah, do you know what? It's quite flat, if you like, in that the diamond cut grooves aren't very deep. And I like that a lot. It drains very quickly on this board. So often you can find that deep diamond cuts in a deck pad, they start to wear on your feet after a while, and they can start to feel a little bit uncomfortable. That's not the case on here. You can be quite flat-footed on here and still be really comfortable. It's important though, just before we go further down the board, to make note of this in the Deluxe construction. Starboard have taken the opportunity to add an additional layer of material at the rail. Now, while inflatable boards are just that, inflatable, and they roll and they pack down readily enough, this here, this additional piece of material, when the board is at pressure and it runs at 15 to 18 psi, it makes a massive, massive difference at the rail. It is much more rigid, the board overall, and it's not something that we've seen before in the Deluxe construction, but it is something really, really welcome because rigidity in an inflatable is key to overall performance. Further back down the board, nice carry handle, fairly chunky in the center. If you are going to carry the board a reasonable amount of distance, it's actually quite comfortable to do so. Shoulder strap. I'm kind of a bit split opinion on the shoulder strap. Yes, it's nice in that when it's against the board, it's retained and so on as well. But it's because it's on a bungee, it doesn't give quite enough that for someone, I'm a 5'11", where I kind of struggle to get my shoulder through there. And it's a bit, well, I find it personally a bit unnecessary, but I think a paddler slightly shorter in stature, perhaps someone who's a bit more petite, that may be a welcome addition. But for me, slightly taller, it's not something that I'd really look for in the board. The nice thing is though, it's easily removed. You simply drop it off the D-rings on the side of the board. And yeah, you can stow it away for later if it's something you want to add back on. I'd certainly remove it though if surfing, just to clean everything up, because the last thing I want to do is pop a foot in here. Working our way back down the deck pad though, you've got this nice aesthetic, and Starboard do produce some really good looking boards that washes all the way down to a pretty generous kick pad and the tail of the board. And then we end up with your standard fare as D-ring, valve goes for your leash attachment and so on. So look, let's take the board now and roll it over onto its rail, because there's something really interesting that Starboard have done to the underside of this board. Now, while you can see that overall outline shape and how it's starting to narrow towards the tail, Starboard, in their wisdom, and good job they have too, they've added this hard release edge. Almost a third of the board is wrapped in this edge as it comes around. What's really interesting though is just how far they've actually tucked it onto the underside of the board. It's not on the rail kind of protruding, it's really underneath the board. That does one thing. It gives a really clean edge for the water to flow off this board. When surfing, this board really, really comes into its own. The rocker line and then also the pairing of this rail means this board surfs. Starboard in their lineup, they have a board called the Surf Deluxe, which sits at around about 9.5 foot. That probably in the marketplace at the moment is the best surfing shape out there. If surfing is purely what you're looking for, a nice portable board, that board should absolutely be on your shortlist. But that technology, this rail, well, that's where it comes from. So this board does perform. Importantly as well, Starboard have added a thruster fin setup on this board, and they haven't skimped on the fins. These are Starboard's Armour Core thruster fins. They're both 4.5 inches in length, and they've paired that with a 8-inch surf style fin on their US fin box. One thing I really like in their boards in 2023 is, well, the fin box. They've gone off and produced their own US fin box for the center. It's a teardrop type shape. It's very streamlined, and it just goes to show that little bit extra where Starboard are pushing in those different areas where perhaps other brands aren't at yet. So the Starboard Generation in 2023, well, we've already sold out. We sold out prior to the board initially arriving. We have more boards coming over the course of the year and beyond. And well, I think that's purely and simply as to the success of the composite generation. It really struck a nerve. It really just ticks so many boxes for so many paddlers. It is a real Swiss Army knife of a board. But all of those facets, all of those qualities that really make that board stand out in a composite, or Starboard, through some magic, have managed to carry all of that over into an inflatable. So now you've got an inflatable which performs just as well almost as a composite board, but you've got that added ability of durability, because an inflatable board will always take more punishment than a composite board, and portability. So now, well, you can take your generation anywhere. Thanks for watching our video. If you've got any questions about what you've seen, why not give us a call in the shop or head over to thesupco.com. To stay up to date though with all of our videos, well, make sure you subscribe up here and hit the notification bell. But to see our next video, well, take a look up here.